This is the Resistance Report from March 30th, 2017. The theme tonight is accountability, government accountability, or, in the case of the Trump administration and many Republicans, lack of accountability. Our job is to try to show you patterns, to weave together the stories of the day, and to give you context. And I hope we are serving that purpose. If we are, please tell your friends and others to tune in. Today, Donald Trump tweeted something that exacerbated the Republican Civil War. And that civil war is taking place right now in the House of Representatives. He said, and I'm quoting, the Freedom Caucus, now those are the 32 members of the House who refuse to go along with Trump Care. The Freedom Caucus will hurt the entire Republican agenda if they don't get on the team and fast. We must fight them and the Democrats in 2018! Exclamation point. Now that tweet reverberated today all over Capitol Hill, because what Donald Trump is essentially saying is that he's going to make an enemy not of the fairly significant 26 Republicans who were moderate and said that they didn't want to go along with Trump Care because it would get rid of the Affordable Care Act protections for many of their constituents. No, Donald Trump is taking on the 35 Republicans at the opposite end of the Republican Party who said they didn't want any replacement, or certainly not the replacement that Paul Ryan came up with for the Affordable Care Act, would much rather have nothing at all, just repeal. Now that decision by Donald Trump is a purely ideological decision. If Donald Trump, think about it, were a leader, were interested in actually getting anything done, whether it's tax reform or infrastructure or anything else, he would say, well, I've got Democrats, or I could get Democrats behind me, maybe, if I was constructive about it, and I certainly have moderate Republicans. That's the coalition I need. I am never going to be able to bridge this huge divide in the Republican Party because they've just demonstrated that they can't possibly come together. They are in a civil war. But instead of making that determination, now granted, knowing everything we know about Donald Trump, it is extraordinarily unlikely he would do anything like that. But instead of doing that, what he is doing is exacerbating, making worse that civil war, making it almost impossible now for him to create a coalition in the Republican Party to do just about anything. He's antagonized the so-called Freedom Caucus. And by the way, when he says that we are going to fight them in 2018, what in the world is he talking about? Who is we? These are Republicans who are in very deep red Republican districts. Their only opposition in their primaries, to the extent that they have ever had any opposition in the primaries, comes from Republicans who are even further right than they are. So the idea that somehow Republicans in the Freedom Caucus are afraid of Donald Trump is absurd, and they made that known today. Several of them said on the record and off the record that they are not in any way afraid of Donald Trump. In fact, kind of bring it on. Donald Trump is not, let's emphasize, a seasoned politician. In fact, he's not a politician. He doesn't have any competence. I mean, remember, he sold himself as the art of the deal, the guy who could come in and actually get things done in Washington. Instead, he's got nothing done. Now, let me just say one more thing about this and this theme of accountability or lack of accountability. Word came down today that 2 White House officials actually helped Devin Nunes, who is the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, helped him get hold of those classified documents last week that Nunes viewed, and then, remember, the next day Nunes came to the Oval Office and so-called revealed the contents of this classified material, showing that, in fact, according to Nunes, intelligence agencies had swept up in their surveillance of the Trump Tower some of Trump's aides and advisors, inadvertently. And that, presumably, said Nunes, lent some credibility to Trump's allegation and his claim that Obama had wiretapped him. Well, obviously, it did not do that. But what is this all about? I mean, you've got these two people, one of them, Ezra Cohen-Watnick. He's the Senior Director for Intelligence at the National Security Council. He's one of the people who apparently got this classified information to Devin Nunes in that kind of cloak and dagger routine last week, that kind of dead in the middle of the night. Remember when he went to the White House grounds? Now, Ezra Cohen-Watnick is the Senior Director of the Intelligence. He's the Senior Director for Intelligence, I should say, at the National Security Council. This is no mere low-level staffer. This is a major player in the intelligence community. He was formerly Defense Intelligence Agency. He was an official in the Defense Intelligence Agency who had been brought into the White House by no less than Michael Flynn, the National Security Advisor who was fired because of his lies about his relationship with the Russians. Now, the other person who did this was a man named Michael Ellis, who's a lawyer who works on national security issues at the White House Counsel's Office. And he formerly worked on the staff of the House Intelligence Committee. In other words, this was not a kind of leak. This was not just a random low-level set of officials who in the middle of the night went out to the White House grounds and showed Devin Nunes, these so-called classified materials. No, this was set up by Trump and by Bannon, presumably, and by Kushner. This came down from the highest levels. It was a play. This was a complete hoax. It was and the idea that the next day he comes into the White House to tell Trump what he saw, well, obviously Trump knew what he saw, and he makes a public announcement. This is a ridiculous, absurd drama. And in terms of the theme of accountability, why are these officials, Ezra Cohen-Watnick and Michael Ellis, why are they not being held accountable for revealing classified material? Why is there no sense that somehow you can summon the head of the Intelligence Committee down to the White House in the dead of night and show him things that he doesn't show the rest of the committee, and these officials, their names are going to be withheld for a time, and then it comes out, and there's no accountability at all to anybody for this whole charade, and it is a charade. And meanwhile, we have information that Michael Flynn himself is trying to get immunity for testifying against Trump, or at least revealing some things, perhaps, about Trump and his relationship to the Russians. That's what he said today. The Wall Street Journal had an article saying that Michael Flynn is seeking immunity, presumably immunity from prosecution. He went to, or rather his lawyer, approached the heads of the House and the Senate Intelligence Committees and the FBI, seeking this immunity. Well, this sounds pretty explosive to me, doesn't it to you? I mean, it sounds like Michael Flynn has something to say. Why else would he be talking about immunity? What does he want immunity for? Or from? If not something that he did which presumably could be extremely serious, maybe even treasonous behavior. Who knows? And he's willing to, what? He's willing to give information about Donald Trump? My friends, this gets curiouser and curiouser. Who is accountable for what here? When will we know what's really going on? Now, today, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Richard Burr, Republican of North Carolina, he is putting on a pretty good demonstration. Let's put it that way. I was going to say show. It's not a show. It's a demonstration that he's serious, in contrast to his corresponding committee chairman on the House side, Devin Nunes, Richard Burr wants to be considered to be nonpartisan and serious. And so they start today with their hearings. And all those hearings really establish is something that's already been established, and that is that Russia did intervene in the 2016 elections. Well, the thing that we all want to know about is not that. I mean, we know that already. That's been established. What we all really want to know about is the extent to which, if any, Donald Trump and his aides colluded with the Russians in this. Now, we'll wait to hear. Maybe there are going to be more hearings. Maybe all of this will come out. Maybe, in fact, Michael Flynn gets immunity. We don't know. We'll find out. But on this theme tonight of accountability or lack of accountability, let me just share you another piece of news that fits in. I should say that when I was Secretary of Labor back in the last century, whenever there was a request that came in from Congress for information, I responded or made sure that somebody who was working with me and for me and my staff responded ASAP. Whether that request came from a Republican member of Congress or a Democratic member of Congress or the House or the Senate, it didn't matter. I felt it was our responsibility to the public to respond to any question that came to us from any member of Congress. That is not what the Trump administration has been doing. A report out today from ProPublica finds that the Trump administration is not responding at all to any requests from Democrats in Congress. When billionaire investor Wilbur Ross was under the confirmation hearing process to become Secretary of Commerce, Senate Democrats asked him a bunch of questions about Ross's role as vice chairman of the Bank of Cyprus, which has significant dealings with Russian oligarchs. Now, you see how this could fit into the larger story. I'm not saying it does, but at the time, Ross said no. He just needed more time to respond to those questions. He would get back to the Senate. That was February 16th. It is now March 30th. Still no response whatsoever. Senate Democrats repeatedly have asked the questions. No response. Not even, I'll get back to you in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Nothing. Zero. Nada. Democrats have also requested details on Jared Kushner's conflicts of interest. Nothing. They have asked for information about how agencies will implement the Trump-ordered changes in Obamacare. Nothing. They've asked for details on officials the administration has quietly installed in so-called beachhead teams across the government. They've asked that of various departments. They've also asked that of the Trump White House. Nothing. Hundreds of requests from congressional Democrats, from senators, from House members, to the Trump administration, to the White House, to the agencies. No responses whatsoever. What do they think? What is going through the minds of the Trump administration? Well, probably nothing, except we don't have to respond to the Democrats because they don't have any power. Republicans are in power in both the Senate and the House. That's probably what they're thinking. But that view is so antithetical to the role that public officials play in our system of government. They are accountable, or should be accountable, to Democrats as well as Republicans because they're accountable or should be accountable to the entire country. So how do we actually make them accountable? Well, one way we've talked about already on this resistance report is to make sure that the House or Senate or both are flipped in 2018 so that the Trump administration can't just basically say, we don't have any responsibility to Democrats or to all the people in the United States who consider themselves Democrats or independents. But there are other institutional pressures working their way toward making the Trump administration a little bit more accountable, or at least forcing it to be a bit more accountable. One is the states, and I want to emphasize this. We've talked about it before, but state governments and state attorneys general going to state courts, a very powerful and effective technique. For example, and I'll talk about this more in a moment, just yesterday, a federal judge in Hawaii has put on permanent stay, a permanent injunction against the Muslim travel ban. Now that is significant. Didn't get a lot of play in the press, but that is a significant pushback. Or consider the governor's races in 2018. I want to put this on your plate as well, or put flags there, because you've got to think about this. This is a great opportunity. Those 2018 governor's races are absolutely critical, and Republicans are on the defensive. The math is on our side. Think of this, 36 states, 36 are going to be holding contests for governor. 26 of these states are currently held by Republicans. 14 of them have governors with term limits, which means they can't run again. And that leaves open seats in some of the nation's most populous and important states, where Democrats could make huge headway. Ohio, Michigan, Florida. The stakes are huge. And I want to emphasize why. Because governors will have a hand in redistricting House seats in the next decade, and could also strengthen state-level climate policies even as Trump weakens them nationally. It's not just climate change. I mean, look at California. California is inhabited by 1 out of 8 Americans. If it were a separate economy, it would be the world's 7th largest economy. California is planning right now to take on Trump directly on environmental standards, but also on social insurance, on immigrant rights, even on the rights of unauthorized immigrants in terms of sanctuary cities. The fight is coming, and it's going to spill over into the rest of America. It's going to help fortify resistance nationally. It's not just California. I want to hasten to say that the state of Washington and Oregon, all of us here on the West Coast, are fortifying ourselves and preparing ourselves right now for these fights, and they will be very, very large and important fights. They will establish, I think, some important limits on what the Trump administration can do. And finally, Trump's fact-free analyses, his war on truth, is also going to come back to haunt him and his administration. Remember, one reason the federal courts have rejected, most of them, Trump's travel ban is because it is premised on nothing. It has no reasonable basis in fact. The assumption that it is necessary to protect American safety is absurd because the Trump administration have no facts to back up their claims that somehow these 6 dominant Muslim nations are responsible for a high possibility, a high probability of attacks on Americans, terrorist attacks on Americans. They haven't killed any Americans in terrorist attacks. Courts do defer to the executive branch when the executive branch has any reasonable grounds, when it has any fact-finding. But Trump is, and his departments are engaging in no fact-finding whatsoever, which means the courts are not going to defer to them or consider Trump's new efforts to roll back climate change legislation Well, they are not based on any facts. In fact, to the contrary, Scott Pruitt and Trump both doubt that human beings are causing climate change. Well, 98% of the scientific studies